Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. Most of you know that I love to salvage and rescue fabric wherever I can, and recently I picked up about 200 sample swatch cards. These are just some of them. These are upholstery fabrics. I like to put them to good use to make bags with them. In one of my recent sew to sell videos, I showed you a bag. It was kind of like a patchwork bag. It's 4 pieces at the front, 4 at the back, and I've been selling quite a few of them. And today's video is going to show you how I go about making those bags from these sample swatch fabrics. So stick around, I'll show you how I use these sample swatch fabrics to make that patchwork bag that I showed you in my sew to sell video. Here's a close-up of the fabric. This swatch here is, it's like a flocked or a textured fabric. I don't know if you can see the raised sections of the fabric. It almost feels like a velour or a suede with fabric in between the layers just there. And then all of the others are similar textures as well. And this one here is just lots of different fabrics with some embroidery going through it. These will make up great bags. Okay, how I go about taking these swatches off the card. If they're too difficult to remove just by pulling them from the sheet behind it, I just run the iron over the back of this. It'll release the glue that's on the back, and then this can just peel straight off. It gets quite hot, and there's my piece that's been separated. It does have a sticky residue on there. I tend not to use that section. But once you get your first piece, you can usually start peeling the layers away. I fold that back over so that I don't put any more glue on anything, and then I'll just continue to press until I can get those fabrics off. So it's as simple as that. Once you heat this fabric up, it releases the glue and it's easy to get the fabric away from the adhesive paper at the back. Once you've removed the main piece from behind the fabric, all you need to do is just run your finger along these. Most of the time they're old and the glue will give way really easily. And that just comes away from the fabric and you're left with a piece that looks like that with a bit of a fold at the top. So I will use as much of the piece of fabric that I can to put together into my bags. I'm going to go and take the papers off all of these. Then we can see how I put the colours together. All right, I've removed all the paper from the back of these. They do need to be trimmed back a little bit, but all I need to do now is sort out which way I actually want to place these fabrics together. So I usually try to alternate patterns and planes and colours. So I'm going to have 4 colours on one side and 4 on the other side. So after a bit of shuffling around, this is how I'm going to lay the fabric out to create my bags. Now I'm not going to start cutting them to size just yet. I actually want to sew them together first. Once I sew them together and top stitch, then I can trim everything down to size. So what I will do here, these 2 pieces I'll take and I'll place them on top of each other just like that. Do the same here, line those up, and the same on this side. And then what I'm going to do is take them to the machine and I'll do a stitch all the way down one long edge on each of these pieces. And just so that I don't forget which side I'm supposed to be stitching, because we want the bags to alternate in colour and pattern like this, I will actually put a clip on the side, otherwise I'll get stuck and I'll end up putting the wrong pieces together. So I'll set those ones aside, and because I still have lots of pieces left, I'll actually go and use up the whole swatch sample to make my bags, and then I'll sew a whole heap of them together at the same time. Well, this is the next lot of colours, and when I take them off the sample boards, I usually keep them in the same order that they come off. That way I know that they've been done in graduating colour, and it makes it a little bit easier for me to work out how I'm going to put them together. I think these 2 are a little bit too bright to go with this one, only because it messes with my senses. So I'll take those to the side because I can use those on smaller bags, and I think that looks a little bit more balanced as well. And I'll change that one, and I think I will put that one over here. Okay, after much procrastinating, this is the way I'm going to put these together. So I'll clip those together as well, and I'll take the whole lot to the machine and stitch all of those together. So this is actually going to give me 2 bags. So I've got enough fabric pieces here for 2 bags. We'll take the pieces to the machine now and stitch down the long edge of each one. And once we've done that, we'll open it out and we'll top stitch down the long edge as well. So I will just go and stitch the first one, put that to the back, grab the next one and just continue stitching until they're all done. Once all of my pieces are done, then I will start again, open them out and top stitch. Okay, now that this pile has all been stitched together, I'm going to go and take each one and top stitch them. Because I've top stitched this fabric to the plain fabric, I'm going to do the same for every one after that. So even though it's come off the same way, I'm just going to flip that around and top stitch to the plain side. Later on, when we put these fabrics together, we'll be able to lock them in place. So far what we've done is just stitched the 2 side pieces together, and we're now ready to go and stitch these together, place these right side together, and where I did the top stitching to the plain side, the seam underneath is facing this way and the seam under this one is facing that way. So when we position these together, we're going to have our seams locking together and facing in opposite directions to each other. So then we will go and stitch all the way down the long edge, and then we'll come back and top stitch. I'll find the best way to actually put these together. I'll want to have as straight as possible a seam. We're going to square this all up after we've stitched these pieces together. For now, we're going to take this layer, place that over the top there. I've just put a clip in place so that I know which direction I'm sewing or which side I'm sewing. I'll do the same for this one. I'll line them up when I go over to the sewing machine shortly. Then I'll get the next lot of fabrics that I've got and I'll work out which way I'm going to do that. And again, I'll flip that up, clip it together, and these are the sides that I'm going to stitch. So now I'll take these pieces over to the machine and stitch all down one side, and then we'll open it out and top stitch. The only thing I do need to make sure happens here is that the seams that I've already stitched lock in place nicely. Then anything else, if it's not straight, I'll be straightening that up with my stitching. But as long as my seams connect here, everything else will be able to be squared up nice and evenly after. When all of these are stitched down the side, you can open it out and we can do a top stitch. Just choose whichever side you want to top stitch. I usually let the fabric do the talking, so if it wants to go a certain way, then I'll allow it to go that way. So that's one front panel of the bag done. All we need to do is stitch the rest and then square this up. Okay, I've got my 4 sets ready to go. It's now time to square up the fabric. Using this kind of upholstery fabric, because of the glues and all sorts of other things, quite often you'll have the fabric stretching out of shape or just not even lining up. So this is why I don't worry about doing anything about lining the fabric up until I'm at this stage here. What I want to do now is have the back piece and the front piece the same size as each other. So I'm going to square them up and get them nice and even all the way around, and then I'll be able to determine what size lining I want for them as well. And I'll do the same thing for this one. We might grab this fabric here first. Let's grab that one. This one looks a little bit more distorted, so there's a fair bit to chop off just on the edge there. I usually like to use my seams as a reference point for squaring up fabric. I'll line up a straight edge of my ruler with the straight edge of a seam here. So you can see the straight edge there is straight across the seam, and then the rest of the fabric will be straightened up here, and then I'll make my cuts. rather than trying to straighten up on this side because it may not be straight across here. I've got roughly 7 inches from the center out, and I want to get some good usable fabric from this. So I'm using the straight edge just there. I'll move that right across and get the most that I can out of this piece of fabric. I'll do the same on all 4 sides. So I've got that straight edge there, and once I have a straight edge, I can actually use that as a guide. So I can line up a straight edge on my ruler against the fabric and make sure I chop off as little as I need to. So there's my piece nice and even now, and I can lay this straight over the top and cut the next piece out to the same size. Okay, now all I need is a piece of lining cut to the same size. Okay, for my lining, I have 2 pieces of fabric here that are just wide enough for the width of the bag, and I'm going to place one of these pieces over the top of my lining, and I'll cut my lining out to the same size as the bag. So there's my bag piece and my 2 lining pieces, all the same sizes, and I'm going to cut out a piece for a pocket as well. I'd like to put a pocket on the inside of these. So inside this bag, I'm going to put just a small pocket. It'll help break up the colours of the lining on the inside, and there'll just be a little area where you can put some cards or coins or your keys. Now I'm using another piece of sample swatch fabric. I'm using the entire size of the actual piece that's come off the swatch sample. This piece of fabric is 9 inches by 7 inches. All I'm going to do now is fold it in half right side together. I'll leave a small opening at the top here, stitch across and down, and same on the other side. Trim the corners, turn the little pocket through, then I'll top stitch it along the folded edge and we can put it on at the inside of our lining. So I've taken the pocket piece to the machine, stitched along the top and down the side on both sides, left an opening here and clipped the curves. Then I've turned the pocket the right way through and stitched one long edge. Then we can grab a lining piece. So this is my longest length here and the shortest across here. Taking the shorter edges, fold that in half and mark the centre and open that out. I've got the centre of my pocket piece also marked, and that's just going to sit directly over the top like this. So I want it in line with the centre. Where you want the pocket positioned is completely up to you. Of course, you don't want it too close to the bottom because we still have to box our corners. I'll bring my pocket piece down about 4 inches from the top edge. So I've lined my pocket up 4 inches from the top edge, and it's nicely centered in the middle of the fabric there. So once that's pinned in place, you can go along and stitch at the top edge here, go back and forward a couple of times, all the way down, across and up again, and reinforce that seam just on the edge there, and you've got a nice quick little pocket for it. If you're making these to sell, then pop a label on here somewhere as well. I'm actually going to use my fabric label on the inside of the bag this time rather than the outside. Once your pocket's been stitched on, and your label if you use them, place the 2 right sides together of your lining. We're going to leave the top edge open, pin down the sides and along the bottom, and leave an opening of about 3 inches along the bottom here. And then we'll stitch that closed. For our main fabric, we need to put some handles. Now, I like to use strapping. It's a lot quicker for me and I don't have to go to the trouble of making up handles. If you're using, say, quilting fabric and you want to make some handles, cut a strip off from the width of your fabric. This strip is 44 inches long, and then I would just cut it in half. So if you're going to make your handles, cut a strip that is 4 inches wide by the width of your fabric, fold it in half lengthwise, and then bring these raw edges together, fold that in half and fold it in half again, and stitch down both sides of the long edges. You don't need to do the short edges. If you're using strapping, get your 44-inch length and cut it in half so that you have 2 pieces. To mark the position of your handles, find the centre of your fabric here, which is where the seam is, and we're going to measure 3.5 inches from the center seam here out to here. So the first handle will be placed right in the center there at 3.5 inches. Bring your handle up and around, and you'll place this one the same distance from the center. So we'll have 3.5 inches from the center, and place the strapping or your handle directly over the top there, and just make sure your handle is flat. And then we can stitch this close to the very top edge there. We'll do the same for the other side of the bag as well. Once your handles are together, bring the right sides together, and we can line up the side edges along here. Before we do that, we have intersecting seams here, so we want to make sure that this fabric here lines up with the edge of this one here. So we want them nice and straight. The seams will lock in together there, and we can start from here to actually start clipping, then clip down to the end and line it up at the top as well. And you'll do the same at the bottom and the same on this side as well. Okay, I've got the edges all clipped together. Handles are tucked away neatly on the inside. Stitch straight down both long edges and along the entire bottom to close that up. Take your lining piece now, and we're going to work out what we want in the boxed corners. This isn't an overly big bag. I don't think it needs to have a lot of space inside. So I'm going to go with a 1.5 inch boxed corner, which will give me 3 inches. So if I take my seam gauge and I measure 1.5 inches from the stitching line, I'm going to use a thick texture so that you can see. And I usually use a template, so I've got 1.5 inches marked out here. Do the same for the other side, and I will cut this square out. So that's going to be 1.5 inch corners, but it will open the bag out to 3 inches at the bottom. We'll do the same thing for the main piece of fabric. Line up the 1.5 inch mark on the stitching line. And then we can cut that out of both fabrics. We've got the boxing cut out. If I'm making a big batch of bags and I know what my corner cutout is going to be, I will actually, when I'm stitching the side seam, I'll stitch down to around the area where my boxing is going to be cut out, and I'll backstitch there, and I'll also backstitch there, so that when you open this out here, the threads don't come apart. So it's always good just to reinforce your stitching just in that section there. With your lining, just open out the boxing at the corners there, spread the fabric apart. And we want to have our seams going in opposite directions. So the one behind me I'm going to have going to my right, the one in front will go to my left, and that's clipped in place. And all I need to do is take this to the machine and stitch straight across there. I'll repeat that for the other side, and I'll do exactly the same. Seam to my right at the back, and the front one will go to my left. And for the main fabric, we'll do exactly the same thing. So the direction of the seams is the same. And you'll find when you turn your bag around the right way, the seams will go in opposing directions and they'll lock in together nicely. So again, the back one is to my right, the front is to my left, and that's locking in nicely at the seam here. And we can take these to the machine now and stitch straight across. On my lining, I'll just do a single stitch across. When I'm using upholstery fabric like this, or anything that's got a lot of thickness to it, I'll actually go over the whole seam twice. Now that my corners are finished, I'm ready to put the lining inside the bag. So have your main fabric inside out, take your lining and turn that the right way round. So we want the right side facing the right side on the inside. So drop your lining in, line up the side seams. The one on the outside is facing to my right, and the seam on the inside will face to my left. And the reason I know this is because this seam here is facing to the right all the way. So the one on the other side, if I had that turned around, it would also be in the same direction. So lock those in place, find the other side, and we'll do the same. This seam is facing my right, and this one will face my left. And then we can position the lining fabric evenly across the inside of the bag. Okay, that's all clipped together. I'm now ready to take this to the machine, stitch all the way around, and then we can turn it through and do a top stitch. So my handle is just sitting underneath here. I'll go forward, back, and then forward. And continue on, and I'll do the same at each handle. Okay, dig in and turn your bag the right way around. Stick your hand in and just make sure you poke the corners out of at the bottom of your bag. See, you can see that's lined up really nicely there because we've overlapped our seams when stitching it together. Same on the other side. You push those edges out and then just bring the lining to one side, your fabric to the other, clip it together, and then we can go and top stitch. And once we finish top stitching, we can close up the bottom of the bag. All right, let's finish this up now. Top stitching is ready. I'll go and do that now. Then I can stitch this little opening closed here. I'm going to stitch this with the right side facing up because that way I can make sure that the stitching looks really nice on the outside. When I get to the handle, again, I'm going to reinforce this. I don't want my handles ever to come away, and to date, none of them ever have. I don't do the big crosses. I find that going forward, back and forward again on the inside as well as the outside, I'm reinforcing the handles really, really well. So overall, by the time you've put the entire bag together, you've stitched over the handles 9 times. And it's still quicker than doing the cross. And all that's left to do now is close up the bottom seam. There's my opening at the bottom here. I'm just going to pinch the sides together, tuck the folded edges under, and if you hold it taut, then you can stitch from here to here and stitch it closed. And our bag is completely finished. Let's check it out. There we have it. 2 fully lined tote bags with a pocket on the inside. And apart from the handles, this is completely done out of sample swatch fabrics and rescued fabric. So don't they come up a treat? I just love working with these swatch samples. You can do so much with it. So the bags haven't turned out too badly at all. Now there's a couple of things I want to mention. Usually I'll write down on the screen what fabrics you need, all your supplies and the measurements. But because we're using swatches here, what I usually do is just put them together. I have no idea in mind of how they're going to work out, so I don't know what sizes they're going to finish up. I will just put them all together until I'm happy with a particular layout. I've done great big ones that have got 9 patches in the front of them, so the bags are massive, and I will just cut my lining to suit later on. With this video, it's more about what we can do with the swatch fabrics rather than specific sizing, but it also shows you how easy it is to actually make a bag of any size with any size pieces of fabric that you've got as well. You just got to think outside the square a little bit. I remember when I first used to get swatch fabrics, I used to think, oh, what am I going to do with that? It's just a small piece. There's not much I can do. And I would make really small zippered pouches, or I'd make lavender sachets. But you can only make so many of those. So I had to start thinking a little bit differently. And having done a lot of quilting in a previous life, it made sense just to put the pieces back together again. So these have been selling really well for me in the shop. I haven't had them on the shelves for very long, only a couple of months before Christmas. I had sold the first one within an hour of actually putting it out on the shelves. You may have noticed in the video on the inside that there's still pieces of paper where the seams are. And the reason for that is that the paper has been overlocked or serged on the very edge, and it's a really fine like a monofilament thread that they've used, and it's very, very difficult to get all of that off. You've basically got to shred the overlocking or serging stitches and then try and get the paper out from there. It's already secured in there with the overlocking stitches, so I'm just going to leave it there. Most of these bags are unlikely to get washed, and even if they do, there's that little paper in there. It's not going to affect anything, and it'll stay in with the serged seams. So that's the reason why I've left the paper in there, as well as the time factor as well, because I still want to keep my time costs down when I'm producing these bags. The inside pocket, I've used some more of that sample fabric, and you know, I didn't even occur to me to do this with my pockets when I do other bags. I've got so much sample fabric that I don't really know what to do with it all. I should be doing this a lot more often, and I will from now on. It's just so much easier. The pieces are already cut. They're sturdy enough. I'll just fold them in half and make pockets, because the pockets inside don't necessarily have to match your bags that perfectly. So I will be doing that a lot more often. But as you go, you're always developing new ideas and techniques, and you guys have been helpful as well. You've given me some great ideas, great tips. I'm always thankful for all of the feedback that everybody gives me on all of my videos. I've done 1/2 inch seam allowance throughout, and the reason I've done a half inch seam allowance is because of all the variations in the fabric. Some of it's a little bit wonky and with the paper. So I just wanted to make sure that I used a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that way I would be able to catch everything and not have little bits hanging off the end. Oh, and remember, I had a couple of pieces left over at the end. So out of one story of swatches, I managed to get these 2 bags. So, and the colours matched up pretty well in those 2, and then I had 4 random pieces left. So all I've done is stitch them together. And you will have seen this in one of my batch sewing videos, and I'll pop a link up here. The only difference between this bag and the batch sewing ones is that this has a boxed base. The other ones are just flat. I actually prefer them flat. But anyway, I've made 2 of these bags. All I've done is sewn 2 pieces together, folded it in half, and then cut them in half, so that I've got the opposing colours on the opposite sides. Just adds a little bit more interest to the bags. This particular fabric I don't like with the boxing. I think that they look much better flat, so I haven't priced these very high. These are only $15 each, purely because I don't like them like this. But normally I will sell these for about $25 each, and they sell really well in the shop. But that's what I've done with the excess pieces from that swatch sample. Now, I've been selling these in the shop for $45. I haven't had any problem selling them. I thought they might have been a little bit high. When I sold the first bag within an hour, I'm thinking, no, it's actually a decent price. The lady that actually bought it came in about a month later and bought another one as well. So $45 in the shop. That just covers my time and the strapping and my labels, and the fabric was all free. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.